Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle, HISC Seerah session 197. So this is, 197. This is the 8th session we're doing on the Battle of Tabuk. And just a quick recap, last week we talked about some of the miracles the Prophet ﷺ did during the Battle of Tabuk, which included sort of the multiplication of water, of food, the du'as for rain, du'as for the camels, and then we also talked about how the opportunity to go for Tabuk, although there's no actual fighting, it gives the opportunity for 30,000 Muslims to interact at a deeper, more personal level with the Prophet ﷺ. An opportunity that they probably would not get if they were to stay in Medina, and the Prophet ﷺ was doing the sort of normal head of state type of stuff there. We also talked about the Hadith Qudsi, where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that Allah was displeased with some people who ascribed the rain to the aligning of some of the stars. So the Prophet ﷺ, he made dua for rain, it rained, and there were some hypocrites who tried to diminish that miracle by saying it was because such and such stars were aligning or whatever. And Allah condemned them for kufr after they had belief. And then we talked about how some of the Prophet came with some rules around traveling and fiqh around traveling and prayers and stuff. And then on one occasion when the Prophet's camel went astray, he didn't know where it was. He made the army camp and look for the camel, and then somebody criticized him, and then the Prophet heard about that criticism through revelation. And then somebody trying to gallop to tell the Prophet saying this is what some people are saying, whereas then revelation came exposing the person who was criticizing the Prophet as being a hypocrite, and the excuse that person was saying, I was only joking, and then we finished off with a really bizarre attempt to assassinate the Prophet. So most of the people had sort of gone down into the valley. The Prophet, he's at the rear of the army on a cliff edge, and maybe 10 to 14 people are with their faces covered trying to charge the Prophet and drive him off a cliff. And the Prophet with Hudayfa bin Yamama and another Sahabi, they took evasive action and were protected. And the Prophet obviously was not assassinated there. So that's sort of on the way back from the Battle of Tabuk. And again, here the Prophet it's nearly 2 months he's away. So he camped for about 20 days by Tabuk, sending out delegations and waiting, and then consolidating the northern frontier. And then it takes a week or two to go there, a week or two to come back. So in total, about 50 days, they say between 50 and 60 days he's away from Medina. So the armies, they're coming back. They're coming back essentially victorious, although they've not engaged in a battlefield combat. The Prophet did send out some expeditions, and we talked about one of the kings being captured. There wasn't a battlefield confrontation with the enemy. So news obviously spreads that the enemy was probably aware of the army and decided not to turn up. So this is a propaganda coup for the Muslims, for the Prophet that they have scared off the mighty Eastern Roman Empire. So again, that's a really positive outcome, despite the fact there was no fighting. And the Prophet was able to consolidate the northern frontier, make new allegiances and alliances. And so the Muslim army is returning victorious. They are heading back to Medina. And as the Prophet ﷺ, he's sort of approaching Medina, he sees Mount Uhud, which is a huge, for those who've had the privilege of going to Medina, it's a huge mountain outside of Medina. So he sees the mountain of Uhud, and I love this little saying of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, look, this is a cheerful sight. This is Uhud, which is a mountain which we love and it loves us. And again, what the Prophet ﷺ, one of the things the Prophet ﷺ is doing is trying to reprogram Muslim attitudes and create a sense of positivity. So hitherto, the Battle of Uhud, some of the Muslims, or a lot of the Muslims at the time, would have felt quite negative feelings with regards to that event, because they've, after Badr, they got a sense that they were not victorious at Uhud, and in fact the Prophet ﷺ was badly injured and the Muslims were routed, etc. So for a lot of Muslims, they have a negative connotation with the Battle of Uhud, and obviously being termed the Battle of Uhud, it has connotations with the mountain. So there may have been a sense of negativity about that. So what the Prophet ﷺ is potentially doing here is he's reprogramming the Muslims and basically saying, look, this is Uhud, it is a mountain that we love and it loves us. So he's getting the Muslims to, as I say, recalibrate their relationship with Uhud and have a more fruitful relationship with the mountain. And again, taking away any of these negative connotations from the mountain and the battle. So again, that I just find that a really, really impressive psychological approach of the Prophet ﷺ, where he's, as I say, getting the Muslims to reprogram themselves. And again, this is turning events into positivity. And that's the characteristic of the Prophet ﷺ, is to be positive about things and to ascribe positivity to a lot of phenomena around, because it's through that sense of positivity you generate hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a closer relationship and reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, it's really a lovely little saying that this is a lovely sight. This is Uhud, it loves us and we love it. And as he's approaching Medina, and again we mentioned this briefly some weeks ago, he turned to the Sahabi, and again these are the elite Sahabi, and again this is the army of difficulty, Jaysh al-Usrah, right? They've gone through a really torrid and testing time these 50 days, running out of water, out of food, all of that sort of stuff. Forget the lack of fighting, all of the other stuff. They were ill prepared or poorly prepared for the extent of the travel and journey. And he's turning to these people who've really gone through this torrid time, and he's turning to the Sahabi and says, look, inside Medina, there are certain people who, although they were left back due to their genuine excuses, they have all the time been with you. So these people, they're stuck in Medina. They had genuine excuses, as in they didn't have enough money, or they didn't have enough sponsors, or they were essentially too frail to come, or blind, etc. They wanted to come, but they were prevented through these circumstances outside of their control, the qadr of Allah. We talked about the Baqa'un, those who were crying because they couldn't join the Prophet. So he's saying inside Medina there were these men who, though they were left behind due to genuine excuses, they have all the time been with you, right? Lingerers as they are, they have been while you were passing through the valleys and going along the roads. So they get the same reward that you did, despite you actually doing the walking and traveling the valleys, they get the same reward. And they're turning around to the Prophet and saying, look, do you mean that they have done all of that whilst they stayed in Medina? It's a surprise for them. And the Prophet said, yes, even though they stayed in Medina, that is their state. And again, this shows the power of niyyah, intention. These people genuinely wanted to come, but they were prevented from coming through circumstances outside their control. They had the full intention, therefore they will get the full reward of the people who went on the army. Again, this is really critical as well, because we will talk about some of the people who were left behind, inshallah. So the Prophet, he's returning back, and he's approaching, and we talked about Thaniyat-ul-Wada, which is a little sort of hillock raised area outside north of Medina, where people say goodbye to the travelers, to their loved ones, to the army. So that's Thaniyat-ul-Wada. And there's the hill, the mount of goodbye, or wada, related to that is the famous song that some of the people of Medina, they came knowing that the army's coming back, and that there's sort of music and there's singing and dancing, and they're happy that the army of the Prophet ﷺ is coming back victorious, and they're singing a song welcoming back the army. And some of the verses, the well-known, like the full moon shone down upon us through the traits of Al-Wada mountain. Thanks is due to us as long as our supplicator invokes Allah. And again, some nice poetry around that. A couple of other things that we mentioned before, but again we'll just need to mention again now, is one that there was one of the chats we talked about, Abu Amir al-Rahib, the monk. The Prophet, he renamed Abu Amir al-Fasik. He was the one who was one of the senior people left over after the Battle of Badr, one of the sort of contemporaries of Abdullah ibn Ubay al-Sulay, the head of the hypocrites. He became a Christian. He didn't want to even pretend to convert, so he left to go to the Quraysh, and from there he went to Rome, to the Roman Empire, and tried to plead with the Roman council to invade the Muslims. And they basically said to him, why don't you set up a forward base inside Medina for us? So then he sent word to Abdullah ibn Ubay, and Abdullah ibn Ubay, he raised, as the Muslims are raising funds for war, Abdullah ibn Ubay, he's raising funds to build this mosque, diverting money from the war effort. And they build this masjid near the Masjid al-Quba, and it's called the Masjid of Darar. And as the army is leaving, and we talked about that, the army was leaving to go for Tabuk, Abdullah ibn Ubay, he comes to the Prophet and says, why don't you come and pray in the mosque? Essentially, why don't you consecrate the mosque for us? And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, look, we're leaving. We're the army, we're leaving. Inshallah, I'll do it on my return. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, this is the Masjid of Darar. It is a place where they are plotting against Islam. It's full of hypocrites, etc. When you return, destroy it. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's returning, and then he sends, so rather than going and consecrating the mosque, he sends a group of the Sahabi, and they burn the mosque down. I'm going to just completely burn it down. There's nothing left of it, and this is the hukum of Allah. Again, because this was being used explicitly to undermine the Muslims, to as a forward operating base against Islam, and Allah knew this, and so again, there are lessons in there for us around how we can treat some of these things. So that masjid is destroyed. What's the first thing the Prophet ﷺ does when he gets back to Medina? Every time he prays 2 rakah, right? So he always gives thanks to rakah, thanks to Allah when he returns home. And again, that this was a habit that he would do. Go straight to the mosque and pray 2 rakah. And then as soon as he's done that, then he starts receiving delegations, people who are making their excuses. But one of the other things that has happened whilst the Prophet ﷺ is away is that his other daughter, Kulthum, she passed away. And we talked about how on the return from Badr, one of his other daughters passed away. And here, again, it said in some of the narrations that his daughter Kulthum, she died. And obviously the Prophet, he's very distraught by that. And he said to his son-in-law, who was Uthman ibn Affan, that had I had a third daughter, I would let you marry her. So Uthman, he married the first daughter, she passed away. Married the second daughter, she passes away. But the Prophet is again, he's trying to get over the sense of superstition, etc., and says, look, had I had another daughter, I would marry her to you as well. So again, that's another thing that happened whilst the Prophet ﷺ is away. So getting back to now, the Prophet ﷺ, he's back in Medina. News is obviously there. Everyone's excited. Everyone's going to meet the Prophet ﷺ, and now he has to deal with the people who didn't come along. So the Prophet ﷺ, and we talked about before how it was a compulsory edict that every Muslim male who is able has to go out on the Battle of Tabuk. They didn't know there wasn't going to be any fighting. They had to prepare as if there was. And so this is what we call fardu ain. This is an obligation on every individual that they need to. It's not a collective obligation, fardu kifaya. This is a fardu ain, that they had to go. So anyone who hasn't gone needs to explain why they haven't gone. The 20, 30,000 people went, and if you stayed behind, you need to have a jolly good excuse why you stayed behind. And as the Prophet ﷺ, he explained to some of the Sahabi that there are people who genuinely are excused because they stayed behind, because they weren't rich enough to go, etc., etc., or they were too ill. So that's Allah mentioned that in the Qur'an in Surah Al-Tawbah, where he says there is no blame on those who are weak or ill or find no resources to spend if they are sincere to Allah and His Messenger. So Allah's given the general excuse. And when some of the Sahabi, they heard that verse, they basically said that basically everyone has to go. Only those who are too weak or too ill or have no money. That means basically, 98% of everyone else has to go. So now the Prophet, he's coming back, that he didn't keep a register of the people in the army. So, he needs to, find out from those who stayed behind why they stayed behind. And we talked about how before they were going, there were a few people who were making excuses amongst the hypocrites. One person if you remember, talked about how his excuse was one of Abdullah ibn Ubay's mates, that, he doesn't want to go because if he sees one of these Roman women, he freaks out and he goes bizarre and he doesn't want to be held accountable for his actions. So that's why he doesn't want to go, because of that. And again, that's referenced in the Qur'an as well. And these people, when they're coming to the Prophet ﷺ, before he's going, the Prophet ﷺ would say to the people, leave him alone. If Allah knows him to be good, He will enable him to follow you. But if he were not so, Allah would relieve us of him. So when some of the people are saying, oh, so and so is not here, so and so is not here, so and so is not here, the Prophet ﷺ is basically saying, leave him alone. It's not our concern. He knows the rules. If Allah knows him to be good, he will allow him to catch up with us. But if it's not so, it's better we don't have them. Because if you travel, sometimes and we saw this on the way back, if you travel with hypocrites, when they get annoyed, they can cause a lot of mischief. They can demoralize the army, they can cause rumors, and we saw that in terms of the rumor against Aisha, that they can cause a lot of problems. So it's better you don't have these people who will drag you down, cause discord. It's better if they don't come. So if they're not here, that's fine, So then the Prophet, he's in the masjid, and then he's receiving all of these people. There's about 80 of them who are coming, and they're making their excuses. So the hypocrites, they come to the Prophet and say, I'm sorry I couldn't come because of this reason or because of that reason. And the Prophet ﷺ, he basically accepted or acknowledged their excuses, and then he asked Allah to forgive them, right? So these hypocrites, they're sort of, they were too scared to fight, or they were too much in love with their own harvest season. And then they made excuses of why they weren't there. But then, and again, we're going to talk about this in more detail. There are three prominent Muslims, some of the elite Muslims who were amongst those who stayed behind. There's someone called Kaab ibn Malik, there's Murara bin Ar-Rabi, and there's Hilal bin Omaiyah. So there's these three who basically came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, I don't have any excuses. And again, we'll talk about it more in today's session, next week's sessions, and even the week after that. But basically, to cut a long story short, so we sort of give you the overview, is that these three were subject to a severe boycott. So the hukum from the Prophet ﷺ was that that you're not allowed to talk to these people. So these people were, whilst living in Medina, there was no social interaction. They could still buy and sell stuff, but there's no social interaction. You can't return their salam. So they were excluded from the life of the community. And this is days passing on, 1 week, 2 weeks. This lasted for 40 days. They were in the state of boycott. And then after 40 days, they were told that they need to forsake their wives. So their wives, who may have been living in the same house, are not allowed to be there. And one of the wives, she made an excuse, said, look, so-and-so's, he's really depressed, he can't even look after himself, and he's old, can I at least stay so I can give him the food? And she was given that permission. And then for another 10 days, they are in this absolute boycott, right? And so much so that they felt as if literally the world was closing in on them, right? Despite this being their city, where they grew up, where they lived, they felt as if the world had closed in on them and was squeezing everything out of them. And Allah references this in the Qur'an. And then on day 50, there's a verse from the Qur'an which addresses them. But Allah says in the Qur'an, in Surah Al-Tawbah, and He did also forgive the three, and so they indirectly reference these three, did forgive the three with whom the Prophet left, as in the judgment, till for them the earth, vast as it is, was constrained, and that their own selves felt straitened to the earth, and they perceived that there is no fleeing from Allah and no refuge but with Him. Then Allah, He accepted their repentance, that they may repent unto Him. Verily, Allah is the one who accepts repentance. He is the most merciful. And so that became sort of an issue of joy after that. But that whole story, we'll go into more detail now, is the story of Kaab ibn Malik, one of those three. So he explains, it's a really long hadith. It's a Sahih hadith. It's 2 or 3 pages long. If you look at the hadith, it's in Bukhari. It's in lots of the other books. So Kaab ibn Malik. So we'll start off with that, and inshallah we'll carry on with it next week. But the whole story is essentially about procrastination, delaying, and the evils of that. So Kaab ibn Malik, he is one of the elite of the Ansar. He's one of the top brass inner circle of the Ansar, people of Medina. He's one of the earliest converts to Islam. He's from the time of Banu Salama. They lived near Masjid al-Qiblatain, and that's the masjid. So it's outside of Medina, but it's the masjid where there's the 2 qiblas, where during the namaz they were told that the revelation has come, that you no longer need to face Jerusalem, you need to face Makkah, and mid-prayer they all turned around. And and then if you go to the mosque, if you're blessed enough to go to the mosque, you will see that there are 2 qiblas, the original qibla and then the new qibla. So so they lived near there. So and again, Banu Salama, we've talked about them before. It's a blessed tribe, sub-tribe. Prophet ﷺ said in Hadith, O Banu Salama, stay where you are, Allah will record your footsteps. And then there's other scholars who say that there's a reference to Banu Salama in Surah Yasin, where it said, again indirectly, that indeed it is He, Allah, who brings the dead to life and record what they've put forth and what they've left behind. And all things we have clearly enumerated in a clear register. So Kaab, he is from Banu Salama. He converts, becomes a Muslim before the Hijrah. So he is in fact one of those Nuqaba who pledged allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ in the Bayatul Aqaba. So we talked about the first pledge of Aqaba, where there's and then when the Prophet ﷺ was doing Hajj, and then the second pledge of Aqaba, where there's 12 and then there's 72 and 2 women, and the pledge, essentially pledge of war, where they agree to welcome the Prophet ﷺ into Medina as their leader, and these people who pledge, they say, what will I get in return for giving my unconditional pledge to you to protect you from aggression? And the Prophet says, your reward is Jannah. And they said, we're happy with that. And you remember that this was in the middle of the night time during the Hajj season, and the shaitan, he sort of bellowed in one of the valleys that they're plotting against you. And this was a pivotal part of Islam, because of that pledge, the Prophet ﷺ could now have his own base. For years, every Hajj season, he would go to every tribe coming to Makkah during the boycott. Every tribe that comes to Makkah, he would go to them and ask for support. Will you support me? Will you support me? Will you support me? Most of the tribes said no, or let us think about it. And some of the tribes said, well, okay, with conditions. After you die, we take charge, or other conditions. The Prophet says no, it needs to be unconditional support. And it was only with these people from the Ansar, the Aus and the Khazraj, when they came, they said, fine, we're happy to support you. And that's essentially where the Prophet then realized he's now got a place, and then he starts sending people to Medina one by one or two by two, little groups, and they start ending up in Medina. And then the Quraysh, they click on, well, something's happening. All the Muslims, they're leaving. Where are they going? They're going to Medina. Well, obviously something's going to happen. And then they decide to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ on the night of the Hijrah. And then, we talk about how he puts Ali in his bed and he comes out, blows some dust, and it goes in the eyes of the people waiting around his house, right? But that, and then he did the Hijrah and he went south to the cave of Thawr rather than going straight to Medina. So all of that is because of this pledge of Aqaba. And again, when Umar ibn al-Khattab wanted to start the Muslim calendar, he said, what is the most important element we should start Islam from? And they decided it was the year of Hijrah, when they went from Darul Kufr to Darul Islam, where they established Islam in Medina. They would not have been able to do that had they not had this pledge of Aqaba, Bayt al-Aqaba. So Kaab is one of those people who was at the Bayt al-Aqaba. So he's narrating this story. He's telling his son this story, and it's a long hadith. But again, you need to bear in mind that this is Kaab telling a story where he is admitting to his son he messed up, and he messed up big time. I think it's really difficult as a parent to do that, to openly admit to your son, or any of your children, that you always want to play that you're someone that they should respect, but to admit, I really messed up big time. I mean, we're talking big time with a capital B, capital I, and a capital G, right? And he's recounting this story purely because he wants his son to learn from that, and he wants the ummah to learn from that. There's no sense of pride around that. It is just an honest recounting of what happened, and the evils of procrastination and the power of repentance. So these are the things that again we'll come back onto. So the hadith is Abdullah ibn Kaab ibn Malik, Abdullah the son of Kaab ibn Malik. He said, I heard my father, and his father at this point in time is really old. He's blind. He's old, in his 70s or 80s. He needs to, be guided everywhere. So Abdullah says, I heard my father narrate the story of Ghazwa Tabuk, right? And again, we talked about how, despite the fact that there was no actual fighting, they still referred to it as a Ghazwa because the Prophet ﷺ, he was in charge of the army. And those that where the Prophet ﷺ dispatches an army that he's not in charge, that's a Sariyah. But this is a Ghazwa. So Abdullah says, I heard my father narrate the story of Ghazwa Tabuk. He said, and this is the narration, and this is Kaab saying, I never remained behind in any Ghazwa that the Prophet ﷺ fought except Ghazwa Tabuk. Oh, but also Badr, right? But Badr, nobody criticized anyone for not participating in, because it was not meant to be a war. It was just a search for caravans of the Quraysh, and then the Muslims met their enemy. And again, if we rewind a couple of years, that's exactly what happened. That the Prophet, he found out Abu Sufyan caravan is coming down, and so literally he says, whoever has his camel or his mount ready, come now and let's go, and we'll intercept the caravan and get the riches from the caravan. So whoever was ready there and then, at the drop of a hat, they would go with him. And again, he would be surrounded by his elite, right? Who walk around with him all the time. And so they all gathered and they all went. And again, it was an original raiding party for a caravan. And only later on did it become the Battle of Badr, because then Abu Sufyan, he found out, he sent a letter to the Quraysh, and the Quraysh then mobilized an army 1,000 strong to come and meet him. And the Prophet, when he heard the army was coming now instead of the caravan, because the caravan had redirected itself, he then had a council with the 313 odd people and saying, look, we came to fight the caravan, it's gone. We're now facing an army of maybe 1,000 well equipped. What should we do? because the pledge you gave me at the pledge of Aqaba was one to protect me, right? And it wasn't an offensive thing, right? So tell me what we should do. And again, remember the rousing speeches that were given by the Ansar. So Kaab is saying, I wasn't at Badr, but then nobody criticized anyone for not being at Badr because it was never a war, right? And then he goes on, and I witnessed, and I was there at the night of Bayatul Aqaba with the Prophet ﷺ, when we pledged our allegiance, and to me that is more precious than Badr. And I would not substitute Badr, even though Badr is more popular amongst the people than Bayatul Aqaba. So he's saying, look, in the hierarchy of things, most people, they put Badr up there. It is one of the top rated events of early Islam. And he goes, I wasn't there, but no one criticized me. And, and I'm glad I wasn't there because I was actually at Baytul Aqaba. And I think that is actually more important. Although obviously Battle of Badr, it was an existential battle. If the Muslims lost, they would have been wiped out. But Kaab, he is trying to justify the fact that he really messed up by saying, well, actually, I did mess up, but you've got to bear in mind, these are the good things I've done. I was actually there at the Bayt al-Aqaba, which I think, and a lot of people think, is superior to the Battle of Badr. Not by much, but it's there. So he's as I say, he's justifying, or he's laying the ground for the mess up that he's done by saying, bear this in mind, right? I'm just giving you the whole picture, okay? So don't judge me according to my one mistake. Take things in totality. But know that I was there with the Prophet with every battle. I mean, with all the battles I was there. And although I wasn't at Badr, but I was at Aqaba, right? So, he's mentioning that. And again, he's mentioning it in a way to his son Abdullah, not in a way of arrogance. He's laying out his credentials, right? This is a sense of pride for those 72 people and 2 women, 72 men and 2 women who were at the Bayt al-Aqaba. Because again, they were there, they saw the genesis of a new way of life, of a new religion in its implementation. So this is a really big thing. And so he is proud to be part of that gathering. And there's nothing wrong with being proud of something which is good in Islam. There's nothing wrong in that. That's not haram. Okay? Legitimate pride in the good things you've done is good. You've built a mosque. You take a sense of pride in that. You've done a study circle. You take a sense of pride in that. Not in of itself, but that pride in doing something for the sake of Allah is different to arrogance, right? And the arrogance which is haram, and that's the difference between Iblis and Adam, right? They both made mistakes. Adam, he sought repentance for his mistake. Iblis became arrogant in his mistake. So, I am better than him, was Iblis what he was saying. They both knew they made a mistake, but one became arrogant and one sort of was contrite in that. So it's arrogance. It's that sense of that pride in that which is haram. So having that an ounce of that pride and arrogance, that will disqualify you from getting to Jannah. But having legitimate pride and happiness in the good things you've done in Islam for the sake of Islam, that's perfectly allowable, and you can mention that. And there are other occasions where the Sahabi talked about the good that they have done, not in a sense of putting other people down, but just as a way of creating a balance. So again, the Kaab is giving that context to his son, and again, the scholars have also said that we shouldn't, and again, this just makes sense, you shouldn't judge people by one mistake, right? If you're generally a really good person and you make a mistake, and we all make mistakes, and that's the nature of insan, humans, we forget and we make mistakes. But if a good person if a righteous person makes a mistake, that's not equivalent to an evil person who makes a mistake over and over again, right? So if a pious person, he makes a mistake, he slips up, but then he repents to Allah, that's good. That's the prodigal son returning, and there's good in that. But if you're an evil person, if you make the same mistake and you keep making it, and then you become arrogant in that mistake, right? Whether you do it unknowingly to begin with, but then if you know about it and you keep repeating that and causing fitna for yourself and fitna for the community and fitna for others, that is one of the definitions of evil. Okay. So that's so this is Kaab explaining the fact that he wasn't at Badr, but he was at Aqaba, and then he goes on to say that as for the Battle of Tabuk and what happened to me, because his son obviously knows, he says, I was never more physically fit or wealthier than right before that battle. So now he's coming clean and says, look, basically, I was physically fit and wealthy, never, and he says, and this carries on the hadith, by Allah, I have never owned 2 camels before this point, but at the Battle of Badr, I took 2 camels. So he had a camel and he bought another camel. So basically saying, literally, I have no excuse. The only people excused were the disabled, old or sick, or the really poor. And he's saying, look, I had no excuse. I was not disabled or ill. I was the fittest I've ever been. And for goodness sake, I had 2 camels. I've never before had 2 camels in my life, right? Camels are like, posh cars. Not everyone has them, right? And we can see that from the people who went. They had to share 6 to 7 to a camel. So look, I had 2 camels. I have no excuse, right? I was strong and I was wealthy, right? And then he carries on. Whenever the Prophet ﷺ wanted to go on an expedition, he would always hide his intention, and then he would go in a different direction until it was time for battle. And we talked about this again. So whenever the Prophet ﷺ would go on a battle, he wouldn't directly say where he's going, but he would send out emissaries and he would send out spies to go in a certain place and check something out. And so the people who are watching the spies, they think the Prophet ﷺ is going in that direction because they're watching the spies. So they report back to their masters, the hypocrites, report back to their masters that Prophet ﷺ, he's preparing something, he's sending people in that direction. But then the Prophet ﷺ, he would go in the opposite direction, right? And we talked about that when he's going on the Hijrah. He didn't go straight to Medina, he went down south to the Cave of Thawr, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he's doing this political calculations. But Kaab is saying on this one occasion, Prophet ﷺ was upfront. He told us exactly where he was planning to go. No ifs, no buts. And he wouldn't announce where they're going at any other point. People would see that the army's getting ready, but they wouldn't know where they're going. And they'd have to make things up. And we talked about even before how, Abu Bakr, he was once challenging the Prophet, where are you going? Can you tell me at least? And then Kaab carries on. He says, look, whenever the Prophet wanted to take an expedition, he would always hide his intention and he would go in a different area until it was time for battle. And this is because of the severe heat the facing of the long journey and the desert and the great number of the enemy, the Prophet ﷺ announced he's going to Tabuk. So Kaab is giving the 4 reasons here. The Prophet ﷺ, he announced publicly they're going to Tabuk for these 4 reasons. 1, because it's the middle of summer and it was severe heat, proper heat, and you're taking an army in the desert and you're marching, so they need to be well prepared, right? It's a long journey and he said we're going to Tabuk, right? That is a 2-week march, at least 2-3 week march, 2-3 weeks back, and we'll be fighting, right? So it's a long journey, and again, psychologically put off a lot of the hypocrites. Severe heat, long journey, and the desert, right? And the great number of the enemy. They're fighting the Romans, for goodness sake, and the Romans are, were well known at the time, for being a disciplined army. So they really need to shape up, right? And again, we know it was also harvest season. So the dates were ripe in Medina. Medina is an economy that is completely reliant on the harvest of dates. And they're saying, well, all the menfolk need to skip harvest season because we're fighting a battle. And so that creates a real problem for the economy and for the people. So these are the reasons that, the Prophet, some of the reasons the Prophet told where they're going, and they had to prepare. And Kaab then continues, and the Prophet informed them of where he was going, and the number of people who accompanied the Prophet was so numerous that they could not be listed in any book. Between 20 and 30,000. So no one's going to keep a register of who's coming and who's staying. So again, psychologically for the weak, they're thinking, no one's going to miss me. It's like 20,000 people, 30,000 people are going. If I stay behind, no one's really going to miss me, are they? And again, it's that sort of shaitan, that justification to go against a fardu ain, a compulsory edict, right? And then Kaab goes on, and the Prophet ﷺ fought this ghazwa at the time when the fruits had ripened and the shade was so sweet. Think about how hot it was. And I was more eager for those 2 than the ghazwa. And the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahabi continued to prepare for battle, and I started to go out to prepare myself, but every day I would come back without doing anything. And he's explaining his procrastination. Every morning I would have a to-do list. I need to prepare for battle. I need to get ready. Every morning I'd go out with this intention of doing it, but I'd come back in the evening and I've not done anything. I've not ticked anything off. Right? And he's been given 10 days to prepare. And so he carries on that hadith. Every day I would say to myself, I can do this the next day. It's no big deal. I'll do this the next day. But I kept on delaying until finally the people got ready to depart, and the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahabi left in the morning. That's it. Suddenly, after Fajr, they've all gone. And then he goes, my gosh, and I haven't done anything for the preparations. But I said to myself, it's okay, I'll do it tomorrow, and then I'll catch them up. So we will finish there today's session, inshallah, and then we'll carry on with how he explains what happens next. But again, we finished on that point where he earnestly makes the sincere intention, I'm going to sort this out, I'll do it today. I know I have to do this, I'll do it today. And then just wastes away the day, and then come the evening think, oh my gosh, I haven't done anything. Doesn't matter, I've got tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. Carries on day after day after day. And we'll see what happens next, inshallah. So inshallah, we'll continue with the story of Kaab ibn Malik, inshallah, next week. If not, the week after. Let's see if I get the opportunity next week to do it. So do remember us in your du'as, inshallah, and the ummah. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. جزاك الله خير. Assalamu alaikum.